Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for the November 5th, 2014 briefing meeting. The time is 2:02 p.m. I'll call this meeting to order. First on the agenda is executive services. Dr. Graham, did you want to address that?
Mrs. Elkins is going to present to the board information about policy that's coming forward to be in compliance with new legislation regarding the purchase of instructional materials.
Great. Hi there, Ms. Elkin.
Hello, good afternoon. Wow. Good morning, I should say. I'm waking everybody up. Thank you so much for giving us this time. I'm here with Dr. Carlin, and we're going to talk a little bit about the draft updates that we have proposed for Board Policy 2.18, and this is the district management and selection of instructional materials. This is driven, as Dr. Graham has already mentioned, by some new legislation, specifically Senate Bill 864. And if you think back to the summer and springtime last year, we were provided with a legislative update on some of our policies that would need to be updated. Most recently, you looked at the hazing policy, and this is another policy that, as a result of some legislation, needs to be updated. It amends certain Florida statutes that are listed above, and it really clarifies your duty as a school board to approve and provide adequate instructional materials to all students. So our timeline for this is today we're bringing it to you as a pre-briefing because there are some big changes, substantial changes to the existing policy. We thought it would be a good idea to bring it to you as a draft. It has not been advertised yet. We wanted to give you a chance to take a look at it, go over those changes with you, talk about if there are any additional changes you needed made on that document. And then after that, when we have a schedule for the next workshop, we'll bring it at that time, go forward with a public hearing if that's amendable to the board, and move forward. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carlin now, and she's going to talk about those specific changes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Selkin, and good afternoon, board members. We would like to inform you that we are bringing forward today, as Ms. Selkin said, some proposed changes to Board Policy 2.18 for your consideration. You should have in your packet of information the policy as it stands, along with some strike-throughs to show the language that is being deleted, as well as the additional language that we are proposing. So if you take a look at Section 1, Section 1 is very easy because there are no changes. The statute does not address the management of library media material, and so we are recommending no changes to the board policy in that regard. If you take a look at the second page of your policy, we are recommending, due to the nature of the legislation, that we make a title change from Management of Classroom Instructional Materials to Instructional Materials Adoption. And of course, that's per the Senate Bill 864. And then we're going to talk section by section, if we may. So in Section A, we have a series of language changes that we are proposing. So first of all, one would deal with public access, and we would make sure that public access regarding the adoption of certain materials would be provided 20 days before consideration by the board. The second proposed change of language would have to do with public notice, and that we would make sure that any materials being considered for adoption would be specifically listed and mentioned to the public, along with how they may be accessed. The third change in language has to do with the school board conducting an open public hearing. So that would occur, and that would happen prior to the adoption of the materials. And then on a date after that, and we would certainly talk with you about the right time to do that, the school board would conduct an open notice public meeting, perhaps at your action meeting, in which you would approve the annual instructional materials plan. And at that time, we would also identify the instructional materials that would be purchased for the school year. And then finally, just a reminder that our public comment would be received at the hearing and the meeting in compliance with our current policy 1.09. Then we turn to Section B, and Section B has to do with the objection to the selection or use of any of our instructional materials. So we wanted to make sure we complied with the statutory language on that as well. And you can see on that next page we have a series of changes in language. One would be that parents of students currently enrolled in the school district may file a petition on our district form, and attached to your materials, included with your materials, is the objection form that we are proposing that would be used and signed by the parent. We would ask for some information from the parent. Why are they objecting? What's the specific information, the nature of that? We just would want to get as much information before making any decisions as possible, so we included a copy of that form for you. We would also make sure that that form is available for parents, including on our district website, and that would become available certainly, and we would ask for them to make any objections within 30 calendar days after the materials are adopted at that point. The next section, in Section B, addresses the fact that we would ask the board is actually required statutorily to conduct a public hearing on any and all objections to those materials within 60 days after the adoption of the materials. Petitioners, of course, would be granted notice that the board meeting was going to be held, and we would provide them with written notice at least 7 days prior to the public hearing. All materials contested would be made available to the public on our website, and that would also happen at least 7 days prior to the hearing. And of course, once a decision is rendered by the board, that decision is final and not subject to appeal. We also want to reiterate that the school board would provide annual written notice to parents of their ability to access their children's materials. So whether that's in the classroom during open house, whether that would be available online. Most of our materials at this point are available to parents online. So there's a variety of ways that they have access to those materials. We want to make sure parents know that. And of course, that written notice would be posted on our instructional materials website. And I believe those are the changes that we are proposing. Just a requirement that we want to make sure the notice shall also be posted on the instructional materials website, as well as making sure parents know that they do have access to those materials.
So I can interject this slide. It has one little word that's added in addition in red, and that is also. And we wanted to make sure we were very clear that that notice needed to be posted on the district website and provided in writing to parents. So we felt that that also, through some feedback we had received, would be a good addition to the policy.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Morgan, any comments or questions? No? Okay. I just have one question, and that is, and during the process of actually reviewing and adopting any instructional materials, how will the board have an opportunity to review those? Or will the board have an opportunity to review those before we make a decision?
Absolutely. We can make sure that that happens. There is a projected timeline that our staff and curriculum and staff development are working on, so they're kind of backward planning, looking at where we need to be when we bring the materials list to you. And so now we're looking at a time where public, our board, our staff, everybody would have the opportunity to review those materials, and we'll make sure we get you that timeline.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Morgan?
And Ms. Morgan?
No, ask Jeannie.
Mrs. Dozier?
Yes.
Yes, did you have some?
I do have a question, and I believe this was I believe Ms. Carlin said that when it comes to hearing that there will be a list of all materials that we're going to purchase. Did I hear that being said?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay. So you will give us a list of all the materials that will be purchased. So that means that during the course of the year, there will not be additional purchases that will be made. Is that correct?
The only thing we purchase is more of the same.
Correct. There would be.
The only thing that would be purchased without going through this process again would be additional items that are the same as what we've already purchased. Once this process is completed, those are the only things, instructional material-wise, we can purchase without beginning the process all over again.
Okay. Does that Does that include at the school level, or is that just at the central office level?
Mr. Martin is nodding his head. Any instructional materials have to go through this process regardless of the source, correct?
Yes, there's no distinction in the statute concerning those purchased by the district or purchased by a school. There is some language about what constitutes instructional materials for this purpose. That is something that we're still researching because there is some language in the statute that would appear to indicate that instructional materials that have to go through this process may only be the text or the main source for instruction rather than all the supplemental materials, and that's an issue we'll be continuing to look at. May need to adjust the language a bit to address that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And that will need to include in our plan the training for school-based folks.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. No other questions? Thank you very much. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, under operations with Dr. Atkins, there's a change orders memo from Mr. Snell. And did you want to go over that for any reason? No. Okay. And next we have the plan for student assignment, PH 111814. Mr. Moore.
Mr. Moore is going to go through the changes that we'd like to recommend for the student assignment plan. We had 3 last year. Anytime the language is going to change substantively, I think is the word Mr. Martin uses, it needs to come to the board for approval. So I've reviewed those with you, but this is the beginning of the public information on those changes.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Moore, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. I'm just going to wait for it to come up there. All righty. Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Graham, Mr. Martin. My name is Mark Mora. I'm the Director of Planning Growth in School Capacity, and as Dr. Graham stated, I'm here to share with you the recommended changes to the 2015-16 Plan for Student Assignment. Just as a little background, this is the 10th year of implementation of our current plan, so it's the 10th year anniversary, and this is the 8th review for revision that we're bringing forward. As you know, the plan is reviewed on an annual basis by a task force, a district task force, that takes input from a variety of stakeholders and makes recommendations to the board for changes. And these changes are improvement that solidify the equity and the fairness in the process. And the task force this past year was made up of school-based and district-based members. And as you can see from the PowerPoint, we have representation from each of the assignment zones from multiple levels. At the district level, all of the stakeholders that we included exceptional student education, information systems, the school development folks, student assignment, operations. We had a wide gamut of people that participated on the task force this year. Just to give you some background on the timeline that we've used, the task force met between the months of November and August. We did make some preliminary presentations. On September 10th, we brought it to the superintendent's cabinet for review. The plan is brought to EDAC every year for their input. It was also brought to DAC on September 17th for review and input as well. It was brought October 1st for a final cabinet presentation, and today is November 5th, so we're bringing it to the board briefing meeting to share with you those recommendations. I'm going to jump right into the recommendations. We have 3 of them for you this year, and recommendation number 1 is in regards to proximity preference. And just some background, we have 2 types of proximity preferences in the plan. We have P1, which is a proximity preference for students that live within a 2-mile drive of a school. It is one of the strongest preferences a student or family can have in the assignment process in the lottery. And we also have a proximity preference 2 currently, and that's for middle school and elementary students that live within a 5-mile driving distance to a school. The recommendation is to maintain the current P1 and P2 proximity preferences in the lottery, but also to provide a proximity preference for all elementary and middle school students that currently do not have a preference. And that preference would be to the closest school geographically to their home in the specified subzone that they live in. It would have an equal weight to the P2 preference. Just to give you a little bit of background information, by the way, I'm sorry, the recommended interest here is diversity, equity, and fairness. All of our recommendations, we had some interest that we agreed upon. The background, why we're doing this, the research shows that 22.22% of students with a proximity preference 1 or P1 to a school selected that school as their first choice. So Students that live in close proximity to a school don't always rank that as their first choice, and that's the only way that that preference actually enhances their chances to being assigned to that school. 32.84% of students with a proximity preference to a school selected that school as their first choice. So you can see there's quite a few students that have preference to a school, a proximity preference, do exercise it as either their first choice. Our research shows that 3% of elementary students do not currently have a proximity preference. And how many does that account for? 1,152 students. Right now, when they go to student assignment to select a school or make choices, they don't enjoy a proximity preference. 9.9% of middle school students do not have a proximity preference right now either. So overall, 12% of our elementary and middle school population, when they go to school choice and enter the lottery, don't have a preference to exercise. It's around 3,000 students. The task force thought it would be an equitable thing to do to make sure that everyone enjoyed one. I'll give you some examples. Students that live on our Berry Islands, when they exhaust their enrollment at this school, let's take, for example, Sanibel Island, they don't have a proximity preference to a high school. They go into the lottery. A lot of them are assigned to schools that are far away from the island. And of course, that increases transportation costs and time on bus. We wanted to make sure that those students had the opportunity to attend the closest school to their home, and giving them a preference provides them that opportunity. So the intended outcome, obviously, is equity. All students and families provided with an equal opportunity of assignment to their geographically closest school. We want to look at reducing or a reduction in the transportation costs and the time spent on a bus getting to and from school. And we also want to further the district's commitment to building a sense of community, and schools are a source of community in a lot of our neighborhoods. Recommendation number 2 is in regards to high school capacity. You've probably all heard me up here presenting that we do have some capacity demands, especially in the south and east zones. We are growing at that level, but we do have seats available in some of the schools inside the assignment zones. We currently, at Island Coast in the west zone, we do assign kids from the W3 subzone to Island Coast, which resides in W1. Now, that's a little different from what the plan says. The plan says you can attend a school in your subzone or a contiguous subzone. In this particular case with Island Coast, we do avail ourselves to their available capacity and do assign kids from the southern part of Cape Coral to Island Coast. Now, that's not clear in the plan. It's in there, but it's very vague. So we want to first clarify that language so parents understand that we do have that option. Looking at the East Zone capacity, we notice that we have a same scenario or situation in the East Zone where East Lee County High, Riverdale, and Lehigh Senior are at very high utilization rates. While Dunbar, being a newly remodeled school, does have capacity. We added close to 300 seats to that school this particular year. We currently have probably around 200 seats available. And instead of crowding an East Lee County High School or Riverdale Lehigh, we do want to provide Dunbar High School as its own wide option for assignment. The interests here are equitable distribution of students. We want to balance capacity, and we want to encourage diversity. The East Zone is a very diverse zone, and the demographics are uneven there, so this will be an opportunity for us to increase the diversity in all those East Zone schools. Just to give you some background information, I mentioned about the challenges we have for capacity, and if you look at this analysis of the high school residential population in the East Zone by subzone, we currently only have 1,133 students that are high school age living in the E1 subzone, and that's where Dunbar High School lies. A majority of our students in the East Zone are in E2, 4,323. Now, not all these students attend our schools. Some of them go to our public charters, are homeschooled, or attend virtual schools. So they are in our system, but not in our student assignment schools. And lastly, E3 has 2,605 students. So obviously, Dunbar High, with a capacity of over 1,600, could not fill with just the students living in E1. It behooves us to open up that capacity to where we have the students, and it makes sense to open up Dunbar to E3 students. We also can look at the utilization rates, and this is kind of where we based our recommendation. Dunbar currently is at about 78.4% utilization, while Lehigh is close to 100%, Riverdale as well, and East all close to 100%. So it just makes sense. We talked about equitably distributing our students and equitably using our capacity. Opening Dunbar makes sense here. We do have some E3 students currently attending Dunbar, so we have established bus routes. We do transport kids that are part of the magnet program there. So, one of the things we deliberated on, well, is this going to increase our transportation needs and our costs and our bus ride times? And since we do have buses already traveling from E3 to E1, we thought it won't be as great an impact as we originally thought. And again, we do something similar in the West Zone already. As I mentioned, we have W3 students that are assigned to Island Coast High School because of the capacity needs. Ida Baker High School is, again, like Riverdale, Lehigh, and East, close to capacity. And it's just not enough seats in that particular zone to service all of our needs, while we have a school in the north part of that zone with about 84% utilization and quite a few seats available. So our intended outcome here is equitable utilization of facilities. We want to minimize our projected potential for overcrowding in subzones E2 and E3. I didn't bring any data as far as projections are concerned, but East is growing just like the South Zone, and by 18-19 we're projecting that we'll be at capacity or over capacity at that particular time. And this is just a way to mitigate that issue going forward so that we're kind of preparing and planning for that. And we also want to build zone-wide capacity for continued high school growth in subzone E3. It makes sense. Dunbar has a great program, a beautiful facility, and we really believe once students set foot in that school and become part of that program, that the retention will improve, and that will be an attractor for the E1 school. And again, lastly, the intended outcome of diversity in East Zone high schools is also our intent. Moving on to our final recommendation is in regards to limiting transfers for high school students to the end of their first semester. Right now, the plan is written that high school students can transfer at any period in the year as long as it's not a testing period, and they're permitted one transfer per year. When we started to look at mobility data for the high schools, it's kind of concerning at some schools, and our plan encourages this mobility and the fact that they can transfer. So we want to limit those transfers to the end of the first semester. Let them finish up that semester and that coursework and permit them to transfer at that particular time. We will allow, or we're recommending we allow, hardship waivers still to be submitted with the principal notification requirement that we added last year. Those hardship waivers are heard by student assignment. There's 3 levels, and they're carefully looked at, and basically for hardships as far as medical, family-related, bullying issues. So we're not locking the kids down. If there's some extenuating circumstance, the waiver process is available for those families, and we believe it's a well-vetted process, and it does really assess whether or not the movement is actually needed. In addition to that, beginning in the 16-17 school year, we want to restrict the incoming seniors from jumping around. We do have a lot of that. We have a lot of seniors who will spend 3 years in a particular school, and then before their senior year, transfer to another one. And we want to put an end to that and restrict it so that they cannot transfer after the junior year. However, still allow them to use that hardship waiver in those extenuating circumstances. We want to stress this does not include, and this was input we got from both DAC and EDAC, that they still wanted to maintain those eligibility pools at the first 15 days of the school year. Those kids who don't get their first choice are put on an eligibility pool. And if a seat does open up, we want to allow them to still get that opportunity to attend that school that they chose first. So the interest here is obviously school achievement. Mobility does affect school achievement. It also affects student achievement. It's a challenge for balancing capacity when students start jumping around and transferring. You saw those utilization rates that we have for this particular year at this particular time. Those look good compared to years previous where we had a lot of jumping around. We don't have a whole lot of transferring around because we don't have a whole lot of seats. In the years past, we had capacity in schools and transfers occurred. Right now, there's nothing to transfer to because there are no seats. We want to also decrease student mobility, and we want that continuity that students get from being in a school and the instruction they're receiving. Although we all follow the same curriculum mapping, when you jump from school to school, it's inevitable that some schools might not be in the same spot instructionally. So students can be either ahead or behind in the curriculum if they transfer, and that's not always a good thing for achievement. Some background, a lot of this is from research, and I don't really need to read the research to you. I think you all understand that mobility at critical periods of the year adversely affects academic achievement. And at the secondary level, students are earning credits towards graduation, and a lot of them lose their credits when they transfer from one school to another, or they jeopardize earning the credit that they need. It's obviously disruptive to classrooms and teachers to have continual revolving door of students leaving and coming. And also the overall academic performance of the school and the teachers inside that school, they're being measured now by their performance of their students, is adversely affected. We also have concerns with scheduling. It becomes a very difficult thing when you build a master schedule, and it's a moving target when you have enrollments that continue over the school year. We already have a lot of enrollees that are new to the district, and on top of that, the transferring students kind of exacerbate that. And I know Patty was talking about instructional materials early on, and obviously the loss of instructional materials when students jump around from school to school is a concern with us as well. The background, I talked about mobility, and here's some information from the East Zone High School. You can notice some of them are quite high. Dunbar's mobility rate's over 50%, and East Lee County High's as well. Those are pretty high mobility rates compared to the district average. Here's some South Zone mobility rates, not as bad as in the East Zone, but still pretty high when you're hovering around 30%. In the West Zone, we also have some schools there. Highland Coast and Mariner High have some high mobility rates. So go on the next slide. And one of our intents is to reduce that mobility rate at the high school. We want to decrease the chance of losing or missing instructional materials. And we just want to make sure students are earning the credits they need towards graduation, that they're not jumping around and when it becomes their senior year, just don't have the credits they need to graduate. So those are our intended outcomes of recommendation number 3. Just to provide you a recap, the 3 recommendations we're bringing forward are: 1, proximity preference extension for all elementary and middle school students; the additional zone-wide school choice option in the East Zone, which places Dunbar high in the mix for all kids throughout that assignment zone; and lastly, the limitation of high school in-zone transfers. So those are the 3 recommendations we're bringing forward this year. I'd like to open up the floor for any questions somebody might have.
Do you have a question?
No, just a compliment again. Thank you for the work, and I think the recommendations are terrific.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan.
Mrs. Dozier?
Yes, I do have a question. How do you plan to communicate this to everyone?
I think we're going to do something, and this is really Dr. Graham's decision. Last year we went out on the road and we shared the current plan. Although they weren't all well attended, I believe the community had the opportunity to learn about our plan and how it works. I think we demystified a lot of the plan. We recently worked with Ms. Chandler and videotaping that whole presentation, and I think the hope is to put that online as well. I believe we probably need to work with Ms. Chandler going forward to how we best share this with the community and how it might impact them.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't have any questions either, but again, a compliment. Thank you very much. This is very thorough.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. I appreciate it.
Next on the agenda is gradebook software replacement. Dolores Shellhorse.
And
Good afternoon.
Just a reminder before we begin.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Ms. Shellhorse presented a while back and talked about that we have to make this change because the company we were using, the program we were using, is no longer supported. So this is to give you an update and let you know where we are in that process.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to brief you about an upcoming board request to replace the software that is currently used by teachers to track and report on the student grades and attendance. Susan Joyner and I are here today to give you a little bit of the background information. We'd like to share with you a timeline, the strategy that we are using, the process that we are following, the recommended vendor, and next steps, finally. The Pinnacle Gradebook software that is in the district is currently used by teachers for student grades and attendance. The software has been used district-wide since 1999, but it has changed company hands as a result of mergers and acquisitions. And we're here today because the current Pinnacle gradebook vendor, Global Scholar Scantron, is dropping support at the end of the 2014-15 school year. Earlier in the year, as Dr. Graham pointed out, we came to you because we were faced with a similar situation for student scheduling software, which was also a Global Scholar Scantron product. And we briefed the board in May of 2014 about that drop vendor support. And at the briefing, we shared with you the recommendation of a 34-plus member evaluation committee. And their recommendation was to use Focus School Software Student Schedule as a replacement product. And their recommendation was based on the fact that Focus School Software satisfied the functional requirements of the committee. They had provided an extensive list of requirements, also because of its Florida State reporting capability, also because it has a presence in districts of comparable size to Lee County, and then also because of its expandability to a full student information package. Understanding and anticipating that Global Scholar would eventually drop support of the gradebook, and also for our strategic planning. The recommendation of the committee was approved by the board in June 2004, and the implementation of the student scheduling is underway now, and it's on target for the 2015-16 master scheduling training to begin in February.
Much like what Dolores just shared a minute ago with student scheduling, we have an aggressive timeline with less than a year to evaluate and implement this new software for the gradebook product. What that entails is we need time to configure the software, convert the data, address the integration points, implement the customizations. We have to test the product, and then we deploy it, and we have to train. The training for this is far more extensive than the training for the scheduling product. We're talking approximately 6,000 plus users because it impacts the teachers, the administrators, and other district and department personnel versus about 500 users for the scheduling product.
Oh.
Because of the compressed timeline, we wanted to leverage the prior research that we did for the student scheduling initiative, form a cross-functional evaluation committee, follow once again a structured evaluation process, and then under DOE Rule 6A-1.01214 to enter into direct negotiations for the acquisition of information technology as defined by Florida Statute 282.004114.
What we did, much like we did with the scheduling product, we followed a very similar path. We had to form an evaluation committee, and we wanted to make sure that this evaluation committee was comprised of multiple roles and also the multiple levels that we had represented. So we had elementary, middle, K-8s, K-12s, the alternative schools, special centers, district department personnel. We also had principals, assistant principals, teachers, information specialists, tech specialists, and I know I'm forgetting somebody somewhere. Oh, and district personnel as well. So we felt very comfortable. And you can see from the numbers, we don't have it broken down by name, but you can see from the numbers that are distributed up here, the breakdown of each of the particular groups that we tried to target. We had approximately 66 people that are serving on the committee, and what that meant is that they've agreed not only to attend the demonstrations and help with the functional requirements, but they have agreed to help us throughout the process when it comes to testing the software and then conducting the trainings with personnel. We felt comfortable, and by the way, we extended the invitation to approximately 118 people. So having 66 of those people actually agree to do that, we make them sign in blood, but they agreed to do it, which was I felt very comfortable about. With the committee's participation, one of the first things that we did is we know we have to disseminate information to them. So just like scheduling software, we have a repository for information. That's a SharePoint site that the committee can access. We also, with the committee's input, they created a list of functional requirements, both functional and technical requirements. And I want to say there are approximately 263 elements that were on this list. From that functional requirement list, the committee then created a demonstration script that when the vendor was invited to come down here, they had to follow along and hit those points so that they covered the things that the committee deemed were important. The invitation for the demonstration by the vendor, they came, I forget the date that they came.
The 29th.
The 29th. Yeah,
Oh, no, the 22nd.
Was it the 22nd? I don't know. When the vendor came for their kickoff demonstration, we communicated that not only to the committee, but we invited via leadership links anybody else that was in the district. We also put a notice out on procurement to invite anybody else who wanted to come to the demo who might not be part of the district. It was a full-day demonstration. Originally, they thought maybe only half a day, but I said, with Lee County, you need to plan on a whole day, and we used them up till the last minute, I think, when we were kicked out of the room because there was something else coming in the Caloosahatchee room. So we gave them a run for their money. After the kickoff, or excuse me, after the demonstration by the vendor, what we did is we surveyed the committee. And not only did we survey the committee, but we provided the survey to the people who also attended that were not part of the committee to get a preliminary feedback from the group who attended. There were approximately somewhere between maybe 90 and 100 people who actually attended that. The feedback was wonderful, and the next part of the process, due to the crunch that we're under, is we actually held a formal evaluation process in the Sunshine. Again, it was noted on the procurement website and advertised via leadership links. The committee then came down and recommended, or made their final recommendation, or their formal recommendation. They recommended Focus School software. Surprise, surprise, because it hit all the points. And of note, just like with the scheduling software, 100% of the people who attended the demonstration unanimously, 100% agreed that Focus was the product that they wanted to move forward with. So we feel very confident that we are going to have a product in place with your approval that will make the masses happy after after they embrace change. The screenshot that you're looking at here is Focus School software is housed in St. Pete. That's what they call home. They are currently in 24 Florida districts. Of note is Pinellas County. It has over 100,000 students. Dolores noted before, when we looked originally for the vendor, we had some key points that we wanted to make sure, and being in larger districts was one of them. This vendor also has planned implementations in other large districts. Duval County has approximately 125,000+ students. They plan to implement in 2015-16. Orange County, also another large district with 185,000+ kids, plans to go, I can't read it, but it's 2016. Recently, of note, our neighboring district, Collier County, has contracted with Focus School software as well. And they currently also have contract negotiations underway with Pasco County, which has 65,000+ students.
And so that brings us to our next steps. Our next steps now are to fine-tune our project plan, much like we did for our student scheduling project. We also need to finalize our training plan, which is a very important element given the large amount of people that we have to reach with this training. We need to finalize our contract language and the cost as well. And even though we don't have the final cost at this point, we can share that based on preliminary discussions and planning, we're looking in the neighborhood of $750,000, and that will include district-wide licensing, implementation services, training services, and 3 years of maintenance and support. When we do finalize those costs, we plan to outline them in a board memo, which we will share with you prior to bringing the item forward for action in December. And are there any questions?
Mrs. Morgan?
No.
No? Mrs. Dozier?
I don't have any, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just have two. What would be the anticipated timeline for training?
We anticipate that we would start training before the end of the 2014-15 school year. We're thinking to make the system available over this summer for just to play in it so that whatever is learned before the break, the summer break, that it's not lost, and then to come back after school starts within service and bring the training back at that point.
Okay, and then so for new arrivals to the district, there'd be ongoing training with through the
Absolutely.
in-service
Correct.
process? Okay.
Well, we will ensure that we have ongoing training. It will be through in-service, but typically we coordinate that training schedule as much we do now for the current student scheduling product.
Okay.
We do training at the beginning of the year or of a semester for the upcoming year. So we'll follow that same pattern of training.
And of note also is that the Focus product actually has what they call Focus University, so we can I don't know what they call it, front load. Before they utilize the software, they have to pass certain
okay.
portions of the test. But we're looking,
Right.
we have a dream plan for training that we're working on right now.
I'm sure you do, Susan. Okay. And the cost of $750,000, how does that compare with the cost of our former gradebook software?
I want to point out that the former gradebook software was purchased back in 1996. It was used district-wide in 1999. I think it was there were pilots going on before that. For the licensing back then, I believe it was $300,000.
Okay.
I don't know what type of training was involved back then. But that also, I don't believe, included support, the 3-year support, the implementation services, training services.
Right.
I'm not really sure because it was actually pre my time that I
Okay.
was involved with that. But
Thank you very much. Any other comments, Dr. Graham? No. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I just say we're due.
I would say so too, yes. Thank you. And now we have Dr. Atkins with some dental insurance options follow-up to our October 21st postponement.
And I just want to mention this is in response to the agenda item that was tabled 2 weeks ago. That agenda item will come back up tonight, and this is an opportunity for you to hear, per your directions, the options that exist should we decide we want to do something different than go with the original recommendation of staying with who we have for one more year.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon.
We can't. Right.
You.
I wanted to give you a little background information first. That's so much better. First of all, the original contract for our dental insurance was awarded October 25th, 2011. The original period was a 2-year period from 2012, April to March 31st, 2014. We did do a renewal last year that went from April 14 to March 31st, 2015. And we did have a recommendation for a renewal period of 1 year from April 1st, 2015 to March 31st, 2016. And that's what came before the board last board meeting. That was tabled from October 21st and brings us to the options today. We basically have 4 options that we want to present. The first one is to actually renew the current contract for less than 1 year. So you would work with the current vendor. This would require the vendor to actually agree to a shorter renewal period. So as an example here, we'd look at renewing a contract for, let's say, a period of 6 months that would give us an opportunity to actually begin an RFP. Now, there are certain things to consider if you do less than 1 year renewal. First of all, you do have to have the company's agreement to a shorter contract. The second is you would start to have an off-cycle open enrollment. Now, what we mean by that is currently open enrollment is going to occur January, February, because our new plan year starts April 1. And that would be true for, like medical, life, vision, etc. You would have a separate open enrollment for dental if you went this route. Another thing to consider is that changing plans immediately before or after the highest utilization rate period in the summer also has an impact. If you think about the nature of our work, you have a lot of employees that are actually off in the summer. So what happens is they go and they get work done. And so if you look at utilization in the summertime, it goes over 100% with this particular plan. In other words, we are actually paying out more claims in the summer than we take in terms of dollars. So you're talking about changing plans either before or after this period of time. A bid protest could jeopardize coverage. You do have 2 enrollment periods that would take place. The first one, of course, would be when you're the normal enrollment period. The second one would be after the RFP and you're awarding a new contract. Now, this would require active enrollment, and that means that I would actually go into PeopleSoft and enroll. Typically when this happens, I'll show you a graph of this later, but typically when this happens, the number of folks that participate, it typically drops. We do have some PeopleSoft programming that would be involved, but I did talk to Brian Ebers, and it is doable.
And Greg, you mentioned participation. Did you say in the beginning how many currently participate?
I didn't, but I can tell you that currently we have 8,196 that participate. The second option is to actually accept the current contract and then allow that contract to expire, or I shouldn't say accept the current contract, but allow it to expire and then negotiate 2 new contracts. That means if you didn't get a renewal for a shorter period of time with the current vendor, you would actually go out and try to negotiate a short-term contract with somebody else. It could be with the current vendor, it could be with another vendor. And that's where that term bridge gap insurance or bridge gap contract came into play. The bridge contract actually requires competitive solicitation. It may not be the extent of a regular full-blown RFP, but it is a requirement in law that we go out for a competitive bid on such a contract. And then what we would do is we would have to conduct a second RFP for a longer-term contract. Now, the competitive solicitation could still result in a short-term coverage gap if we weren't able to just get the work done in a timely manner. Staff would do everything it could to make that happen, but sometimes things get outside your control, and there might be a short gap in coverage. We would have to do an open enrollment in May before the last paycheck, or August when employees start to get checks again. That's very important. In fact, we would look at doing open enrollment in August, let's say, for a new plan to start October 1. A lot of our employees, like let's say bus operators, for example, do not receive a check in the summer, so we couldn't go get deduction for dental insurance. So what we'd have to do is make sure that we had an open enrollment period in May so that you could collect it out of that last paycheck, or in August so you could start to collect it in the October paycheck. Changing plans immediately prior to the highest utilization time in the summer, again, as I mentioned earlier, is also a concern. And something to think about with either one of these, if you're a vendor, it's like, I don't know if I want to enter into a contract during the highest utilization period. If you look at our past 2 summers of dental, our dental utilization, as I said before, the utilization rate goes over 100%. In fact, I think it got up as high as something like 125, 130% during like the month of July. So that means that if I'm going to take a short contract with you all, I'm going to absorb your worst months, and I won't benefit by your best months. So it's just something that we would need to consider and a vendor would need to consider. Obviously, a bid protest does jeopardize coverage. 2 enrollment periods, you'd have a dental enrollment period and then an all other benefits enrollment. Plus, if you did the gap, you would have an additional enrollment period for that short-term contract that you'd have to consider. So you'd actually have 3 enrollments in this situation. 2 active enrollments, and again, that means going into PeopleSoft and actually enrolling. And there is the PeopleSoft programming, but it is doable. A third option is to accept the contract for 1 year and then cancel after you conduct an RFP and select another vendor. Now, it could even possibly be the same vendor, but you conduct an RFP and you select another vendor. And what you would do is you would use the cancellation clause in our current contract, which says the board reserves the right to terminate any contract resulting from this invitation at any time for any reason upon giving 7 days prior written notice to the other party. So that is the current cancellation clause that you could exercise. And then you would switch to the new contract. The considerations here, first of all, it just feels a little unsavory to be entering into an annual contract with the intent to break that contract. So, that's the one thing about option 3. One of the things to think about with option 3. It does require only 1 RFP. You would potentially have a bid protest that would delay the timeline. And my experience here is that that's a strong possibility, as you're all aware. 2 enrollment periods would incur, again, because you'd have dental and then you'd have all others. Because, again, it's just like that one where you're entering into a shorter term contract of the other 2 options. This is the same type of thing because you're cutting off this contract after, let's say, 5 months or 6 months and then entering into a new contract. So you'd have an open enrollment during a different period of time from your other plans. So again, changing plans immediately prior to or after the highest utilization rate around the summer, and then it requires working around the summer pay concerns that I mentioned earlier. Again, PeopleSoft in this case, I believe, is also doable. This is probably a little easier than option 2. The final option would be the accept the 1-year contract and then conduct an RFP. That way you'd have a 1-year enrollment period. It does give you enough time if you get a bid protest. PeopleSoft would just continue to carry on. You don't have your payroll cycle concerns, and the contract holds the DHMO rates constant. And let me talk a little bit about some of that here. Our current contract with Humana, the recommended increase here was 9.5%. What's happened here is that the utilization of our high DPO is higher than they predicted. It's running a loss ratio in the 90s, and typically you're wanting to have I think actually it's about 94% right now. You actually want to have this loss ratio be down about 85%. In other words, I'm taking in, the deductibles, the money, the premium, and I'm paying out 85% of that in claims. So that's the loss ratio. And industry standard there is about 85%, or is 85%. This particular plan, the high DPO, is running about 94%, and as I mentioned earlier, in the summer it goes into the hundreds, which is, in other words, you're taking in less premium, or you're paying out more premium than you're taking in. So to balance this plan, this company would like to see a 9.5% increase. However, our current contract with that company caps that increase to 3% on these DPO plans for this year, and then also for next year if we extended, or I should say if we renewed for another year. So this year the increase to the DPO is 3%. the contract also holds the DHMO rates fixed this year. So this year there's no increase in those rates. However, if we renew for another year, a second year after this one, then they could potentially raise those rates up 6% on the DHMO. So 3% per year for the DPOs. We have two of them, a high option and a low option. And then 6% on the DHMO in 2 years, or the second year. This year, there's no increase. Allowing a contract to expire will likely impact the plan design, and that's for the reasons I mentioned below or above. Because you lose those caps, you no longer have the holding the company to a 3% cap. And if you're another company, or even if you're a current company and you're looking at our claims data, you're probably not going to come in with a plan that's going to decrease those amounts when you're running that type of a loss over the course of a year. Just to give you an idea about enrollment trend, if you look here, you see over the last few years, this runs from 2010 to the present. Remember, I mentioned that piece about active enrollment, where you actually go into PeopleSoft and say what you want to do. If you have people do that, some people don't. They just don't go into the system and make a selection. So as a result, we lose participants. That certainly happened to us when we changed vendors last time, which is typical. We don't like to see it drop that much, and that's what's happened. But steadily, it has climbed back up. Now, if you see that in 4/1/2014, we were at our highest enrollment. That was about 8,241 enrollees, and you might be wondering, well, it looks like it's dropping again because now it's 8,196. So we have less than we had last year in April. But the reason for that is, if you think about it, we have people retire, leave the district, a lot of people at the end of this particular year, and then the new people that have enrolled when they came on board are not reflected in this number. So they will be reflected the next time we report the data. So, and that's because you have a delay. You have the 45-day waiting period. If someone begins employment with a district, there's the 45 days before they can actually get onto a plan and start taking insurance. And so we don't, again, those numbers are not reflected here. But the good news is for this insurance is that the current time we have 8,196 folks, so it's doing quite well. Having said all that, those are the 4 options that you would have in front of you, and we've tried to cover just things that we thought should be considered when you're choosing those options. And just wanted to know if there were any questions.
Thank you. No questions. Mrs. Dozier, do you have questions?
Not really a question. I've got a comment. Again, I don't know why we're in this predicament. I think it was very clear where we should have been, but we're not there. And as a board, it's not our decision to decide whether or not which one of these decisions we want to go with. So staff's going to have to bring one forward tonight. It's not up to the board to decide which one we want. It's up to you, and then we vote it up or down. As far as all of these, I hear you saying that one of them will put us in a different enrollment period if we go out for an RFP and then drop the other insurance, and then we'll be in a different enrollment period. Am I hearing you say that indefinitely that will be a different enrollment period?
It could potentially be indefinitely unless you decided to, again, negotiate a shorter term contract.
Well, I think that's what would have to be done, because we can't have two enrollment periods. And it's not the board's fault that we're in the situation we're in right now. I'm going to make that perfectly clear. It is not the board's fault. It is not the board's responsibility that we are sitting here in this predicament right now. So my place is whatever staff brings forward tonight, we'll either vote it up or down.
Thank you, Mrs. Dozier. Any further comments? Thank you. I think my only comment would be that I think we need to do whatever is in the best interest of our employees. And I think that holding the caps constant and not subjecting them to multiple enrollment periods would be considerations that I would want to see looked at. Thank you.
And just for general information, the recommendation tonight will be the one I brought 2 weeks ago, and that is to stay the course for one more year and begin the RFP process for FY16.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay. At this time, we have an opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone on the right side of the auditorium who would like to speak? Mr. Castellano and Jamie. Anybody on the left side? Thank you. Mr. Castellano, will you come forward, please?
Good afternoon, board members. Dr. Graham. I'm Mark Castellano, president of the Teachers Association of Lee County. I'm speaking today about the Insurance Task Force. As you know, the ITF is a joint committee referred to in Article 14.09 of the TALC Agreement. Members of the ITF also participate on all RFI and RFP committees to review and evaluate the proposals that are submitted for our insurance plans. I personally have been on the ITF for 10 years, and I have served on numerous RFI and RFP committees, including the extensive health clinics RFI and RFP and the numerous dental insurance RFPs. This is one of the more thankless tasks, but interesting and educational, that any employee can do. It is often very frustrating to sit through board meetings and listen to disparaging remarks about the work done by the ITF. I went through all the minutes available on the district website, which goes back to the 2005-2006 school year, in part to examine the board liaison attendance, as it has always seemed that the board liaison was absent more than they were present, and I wanted to speak with certainty before I brought that up publicly. I have checked all available minutes. What I have found is that of the last 85 ITF meetings, the school board liaison attended meetings, ITF meetings, at just under 43% of the time. I have the numbers broken down for each board member liaison over the past 9 years, and with the exception of Dr. Kuckel, no board member attended at least 50% of the meetings. Mr. Scott did attend regularly until he became too ill. Others attended far fewer, averaging between 20 and 30% attendance of the meetings while they were the liaison. I bring this up because although insurance is never a popular subject, it is one we who serve on the ITF take very seriously and act on with diligence and thoughtfulness. As it is a working condition and impacts all employees, I would ask that before board members speak publicly in a disparaging manner of the work done by our RTF, that the board-appointed liaison attend the majority of the meetings and consult with those of us who serve on the committee about insurance matters, especially those regarding RFIs and RFPs. Lastly, I want to say that of the many people I've worked with in this district, there are none that I have greater respect for than Bonnie McFarland and Susan Millay. I hear what I perceive to be veiled insinuations made to disparage them and the work they do, and I will say publicly that they are exceptional in performing their jobs, and I've learned a great deal from both of them regarding insurance and the RFP process, respectively. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Michael.
I'm Jamie Michael, President of Support Personnel. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I have been on the insurance task force far longer than I can remember. I was on it when we were at the old building meeting in the superintendent's office. We take it seriously. We go through these RFPs. We volunteer our time. Bob Rushlow was on the RFP for the dental. He was on the RFP for the second time it went through, and it was again awarded to Humana. I don't understand why we're in this predicament. If we go to a different company, that 10% increase is going to be reflected plus in any company we get. We have 2 years with a 3% cap, which is good for the employees of Lee County School District because those employees would be paying 10% plus or more. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Michael. Good. Okay. And now, board comments. Do you have anything, Mrs. Morgan?
I have none.
No. Mrs. Dozier, do you have any further comments?
Well, I did have a couple of comments. First of all, I question the percentages that were given just now for attendance. I'm not quite sure that those are accurate. I would also say that it is the board's decision. You know, yes, insurance task force does meet. The insurance task force makes recommendations, but it is the board's decision in the end to make those decisions. We make all policy decisions. Maybe the insurance task force or certain members of the insurance task force have forgotten that. Also, we need to remember that this board gave direction to the superintendent, and just because the board gives direction does not mean that those directions go out the window, but instead, those directions stay until the board reverses that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dozier. I have no comments at this time. Mr. Martin.
I have none, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Graham.
Just one clarification, when I said the recommendation would be the same, it will be. We will also, though, pursue the market check, and the employee survey is being developed even as we speak. So that will still occur.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. At this time, seeing no other business, this meeting will be adjourned, and we will rejoin the audience at 6 p.m. for the action meeting. Thank you.